This week on Vaticano, a year after Pope Francis's passing, we look back on the life of the Argentine Pope in a special episode exploring his final days in a remarkable era that saw two living popes. We then turn to how Pope Leo has stepped into his role, continuing Francis's mission to reach the peripheries of the world. For this and more, Vaticano starts now. After more than 5 weeks in the hospital battling double pneumonia, doctors advised Pope Francis to take 2 months of rest. However, the Holy Father chose to be among the faithful until his final days. Two weeks after his release, the Holy Father briefly appeared at the end of the closing Mass for the Jubilee of the Sick and the World of Healthcare. After the final blessing, Pope Francis addressed the gathered pilgrims with a few simple words: Good Sunday to everyone.
Buona domenica a tutti. Grazie tante.
The Holy Father also received the sacrament of reconciliation in St. Peter's Basilica, spent time in prayer, and then passed through the Holy Door in union with pilgrims. The following week, Pope Francis made several public appearances. He made a surprise visit to St. Peter's Basilica without his regular papal attire to pray and greet the faithful. And on the eve of Palm Sunday, he visited the Basilica of St. Mary Major in Rome. According to a statement released by the Holy See Press Office, the Pope entered the Basilica to pray before the icon of the Virgin Mary, Salus Populi Romani, that he has visited before and after each of his apostolic journeys. On Palm Sunday, Pope Francis came out from the Basilica for around 10 minutes to wish a happy Palm Sunday and happy Holy Week to all those gathered in St. Peter's Square for the Palm Sunday Mass of the Lord's Passion.
Buona Domenica delle Palme. Buona Settimana Santa.
Following his greeting to pilgrims in the square, the Pope returned inside the Basilica, where he paused for moments of prayer before the tomb of the Apostle Peter, and then that of Pope St. Pius X and the monument dedicated to Pope Benedict XV. While Pope Francis didn't lead any of the main Holy Week and Easter liturgies, he made brief appearances over the Easter weekend. On Holy Thursday, Pope Francis paid a private visit to the Regina Coeli prison in Rome, where he spent about a half hour personally greeting about 70 inmates who regularly attend catechesis sessions and other activities organized by the prison chaplaincy. Though he was unable to perform the traditional foot washing, the Holy Father told the prisoners that he still wanted to be close to them. On Saturday evening, before the Easter Vigil, the Pope made a quick appearance to greet the faithful. Among the last to see and speak to the Holy Father was U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. During the brief meeting, the two leaders exchanged gifts and Easter greetings. Pope Francis's last public appearance was on Easter Sunday to deliver his Easter Urbi et Orbi blessing from the loggia of St. Peter's Basilica. His final public words were simple: Brothers and sisters, Happy Easter.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, buona Pasqua.
After his message was read by Archbishop Diego Ravelli, the master of pontifical liturgical celebrations, the Holy Father blessed the cheering and waving crowds.
Benedicat vos, omnipotens Deus, Pater, et Filius, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
He later greeted the faithful in the square below from the Pope-mobile, for the first time since his hospitalization. The more than 15 minutes he spent greeting and blessing the 50,000 people gathered in the square turned out to be his final ride. The following morning, at 7:35 a.m. local time, the Holy Father passed away following a stroke, which led to a coma and subsequent heart failure.
Devo annunciare la morte del nostro Santo Padre Francesco.
Despite his frailty, Pope Francis made his final public appearance, doing what he loved most, being among the people and praying with them. We'll be back to explore the special relationship between Pope Francis and Benedict XVI.
Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum, habemus papam. Qui sibi nomen imposuit Franciscum.
For many, it was a surprise when former Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio stepped out onto the loggia of St. Peter's Basilica on March the 13th, 2013. His clothes had changed, as had his name. The 265th successor of Peter, the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, would thenceforth be known as Pope Francis. This was a moment without precedent in the modern era, and it wasn't just that Francis was the first pope from the Americas. It had been many centuries since a non-reigning pope was alive while another was elected. While his successor appeared before the faithful in St. Peter's Square for the first time, to deafening cheers, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, who had stepped down as Pope 2 weeks prior, was hidden away at the papal residence at Castel Gandolfo, quietly watching these events on television. What happened next would have touched the Pope Emeritus deeply. Pope Francis called the faithful worldwide to pray an Our Father and a Hail Mary for Benedict XVI.
I would like to say a prayer for our Pope Emeritus Benedict. Let us pray together for him, that the Lord may bless him and Mary may protect him. Our Father, who art in heaven,
che sei nei cieli, sia santificato il tuo nome.
Thus began a decade-long relationship between the two popes, one reigning, one retired. Ten days after his election, the new pope visited the Pope Emeritus at Castel Gandolfo.
How strange. How strange. I think we were all amazed. It was something that was completely outside of any intellectual possibility to see two living popes.
Who has ever seen anything like that ever? I mean, there have been retired popes, a few, over the 2 millennia of the church history, but no image like that. There was still a great deal of uncertainty, but I think by that point, Francis had been elected, he came out to see his predecessor, and that was a very reassuring image of unity.
This was just the first of many private encounters between the two. They were at first deferential to each other, each inviting the other to take the lead. In the end, they just shared the kneeler in the chapel reserved for the Pope. Months later, Benedict would take up his residence at the Mater Ecclesiae Monastery within the Vatican Gardens, just several hundred yards away from Francis's own residence at the Santa Marta Guest House.
He chose to stay in the Vatican instead of going away. He said in his last audience talk, I believe, it was the last public audience, he said, for me, there will be no more going to conferences and giving speeches. I will live a life of retirement, of quiet, of isolation, of solitude.
In the beginning, it was very strange to see the two popes, as it were, one emeritus and one reigning together. But by staying there, I think it did show that he was not abandoning the church, that he was staying, as he said, in prayer in support of the church.
Some people raise the question of, oh, what will it be like to have two popes in the Vatican? Will it be a conflict? Will it be a... I personally didn't think so. I thought that the choice of living in the Vatican was precisely to avoid that kind of thing.
I think it was the only choice to make in that situation, because had he gone back to Germany, as he might have liked to have done, you might have had a situation really of two papacies, because you would have had people going to visit the Pope Emeritus, you would have had problems of security, and you would have had visually an idea that he had abandoned the heart of the Church.
Archbishop Georg Ganswein, his private secretary, stayed with him for what Benedict thought would be his last months.
War überzeugt, dass nach seinem Verzicht
He believed that after his resignation, the good Lord would grant him just one more year. Perhaps no one was more surprised than he was when that one more year turned into many more.
dass aus diesem Jährchen nicht wenige Jahre geworden sind.
After resigning, Benedict XVI only officially left the Vatican walls once to see his dying brother, Monsignor Georg, back in Germany. At the Vatican, though, he took part in several public celebrations, especially just after stepping down. Particularly memorable were the canonization of Popes John Paul II and John XXIII in 2014, and the opening of the Extraordinary Jubilee of Mercy in 2015. The world also saw him at a handful of other events, almost always as just another participant. Benedict's proximity within the gardens could have been awkward, but Francis often said that his was a welcome presence.
I have said many times that it gives me great pleasure that he lives here in the Vatican, because it is like having a wise grandfather at home. Thank you.
And in Benedict's own words, he was in a good place.
La sua bontà.
Your goodness, evident from the moment of your election, has continually impressed me and greatly sustains my interior life. The Vatican gardens, even for all their beauty, are not my true home. My true home is your goodness. There I feel safe.
Protetto.
Pope Francis, during the period of his papacy when Benedict was still alive, treated Benedict with great respect and affection publicly. And as far as we know, that was very sincere. And Francis has said that he consulted with Benedict on certain occasions.
I think it was very cordial. Francis himself said he felt he was a wise grandfather for him and for the rest of the Church. And you couldn't have any other idea from Pope Benedict. That's really who he was through and through, certainly the wisdom part.
There is reason to think that perhaps Francis felt a bit intimidated by Benedict's presence, and that once Benedict was gone, he felt he had a freer hand. That may be the case, but that doesn't contradict that doesn't conflict with the idea that Francis also did have respect and affection for Benedict.
Bavarian journalist and Benedict XVI biographer Peter Seewald actually asked Benedict in interviews if he ever butted heads with Francis.
He did not comment on this, at least not to me. I always tried, of course, also as a journalist, to get something out of him, and he said, no, he definitely didn't want to give the impression, not even remotely, that he was speaking out as a kind of shadow pope about his successor's conduct in office.
And as he carried out the Petrine ministry in Benedict's footsteps, and in an interesting way as Benedict himself looked on behind the scenes, Pope Francis repeatedly stressed how significant Benedict XVI's life's work was for the Church, not only his theology, but also his commitment to the victims of abuse. Francis lauded his efforts on multiple occasions, including during a 2018 visit to an Ireland still dealing with the aftermath of abuses.
His frank and decisive intervention continues to serve as a spur to the efforts of church leaders to correct the errors of the past and to enact strict rules to ensure that they are not repeated.
Che non accadano di nuovo.
Benedict was known to host visitors to the monastery, private visits, particularly with people he already knew. After new cardinals were made by Pope Francis in St. Peter's Basilica, one of their first stops was to the Mater Ecclesiae Monastery to pay their respects also to Benedict. Benedict and his secretary, Archbishop Ganswein, would also pray a daily rosary out in the gardens, accompanying Francis in prayer year after year.
I think that Pope Benedict had a great strength of intellect, obviously, and it was something that carried him forward even with the frailty of his health.
I suppose that if he had remained Pope, he might not have lived 10 years because the stress of that, the pressure of that office is such that, you know, he might have been worn out. But he was able to rest and have a very quiet life there in Mater Ecclesiae.
Non credo che quei momenti tristi.
2023 Ratzinger Prize winner Father Pablo Blanco Sarto, a Spaniard, saw great importance in Benedict's supporting role.
When a pope, in a particularly delicate moment, chooses to withdraw for prayer, it serves as a powerful example of the importance of prayer within the Church. His withdrawal is not only a personal act, but also a gesture of support for the Pope who follows, especially during this ongoing process of reform and purification within the Church. This action exemplifies what he articulated in a theory or in his theology, the theology of holiness.
Benedict XVI died on New Year's Eve in 2022 at 95 years of age, almost a full 10 years after stepping away from the Petrine ministry. His final words were, "Jesus, I love you." Days later, Francis celebrated Benedict's funeral, commending his soul to God.
Benedict, faithful friend of the bridegroom, may your joy be complete as you hear his voice, now and forever.
Benedict was entombed among the many other popes in the grottos of St. Peter's Basilica, thus closed a fascinating and unprecedented chapter in the history of the Church, when two popes, Francis and Benedict XVI, lived together as friends in Vatican City. We'll be back after a short break with more on Vaticano.
Nei suoi viaggi apostolici, il Papa appare a tutti.
During his apostolic journeys, the Pope appears to everyone as a messenger of peace. His travels are what they should always be, bridges of dialogue, encounter, and brotherhood.
Incontro di fraternità.
With these words, Pope Leo addressed the delegation of the Italian flag carrier that takes him around the world during his pilgrimages all over the world. With the first apostolic trip that brought him to Turkey and Lebanon between November and December of last year, just a few months after the beginning of his pontificate, Pope Leo has emerged as the heir to the great mission of Pope Francis, reaching peoples, cultures, and realities in every corner of the earth.
We have a certain perception of the Pope, especially in the Western world, where we always see him
We always know what he says, and we feel close to him in some way. But it's not like that in Turkey, where Catholics make up only about 1% of the population. It's not like that in many places in Africa, nor in Algeria, where Catholics represent just 0.3% of the population. So the fact that there is a physical presence reminds Catholics that they are a part of a great universal church.
Since the time of Paul VI, popes have traveled to the farthest corners of the earth. Apostolic trips have become among the most powerful and profound means of evangelization. Through the Pope's presence, the gospel reaches the world's peripheries, both geographical and confessional.
You see, people need a spiritual leader. When he comes to see you, they feel that there is hope, and so they come. There are floods of people coming to the streets. There were even the Muslims in Lebanon with the Vatican flag and the portrait of the Holy Father, and here the portrait of Khomeini, because they are Muslims. But they come, particularly the children, they want to show that the guest is welcome, because you are a man of peace.
Where the Pope is, there is the Church, a church that encounters, listens, and bears witness to the faith. In 12 years as the successor of Peter, Pope Francis made 47 apostolic journeys, visiting 66 countries across 6 continents and covering hundreds of thousands of miles. His journeys were concrete acts of evangelization, visible signs of a church that goes forth, reaching people where they live, suffer, and hope.
Dili, Timor-Leste, encuentros con los huérfanos.
In Dili, East Timor, during a meeting with orphans, we met a boy who was born without arms. Seeing this, his mother had left him in front of a convent of nuns. He was about 8 years old. After the meeting, I stood close to the Holy Father, and he asked how, thanks to modern technology, the boy could be helped to have arms. That concern, that interest in the fate of a poor child who had no one, has stayed with me forever.
Me quedó para siempre.
Cardinal George Jakob Kovacat, currently the prefect of the Dicastery for Interreligious Dialogue, was the coordinator of papal travels, responsible for organizing Pope Francis's apostolic trips since 2021, playing a key role for the Pope's international agenda.
Es una experiencia muy interesante porque
it is a demanding job. It involves protocol with the country's president, the foreign ministry, security matters, events. But when the successor of Peter arrives, something changes. One experiences the closeness of faith.
Uno vive esta experiencia de fe.
Pope Leo's travel agenda for this year is truly very full and intense, but also makes room for surprising countries.
Geographical peripheries like Africa, peripheries of faith, but also peripheries that might not seem peripheral, such as Monaco, which marked the Pope's first trip in Europe. It is a journey, an absolute first, but above all, a visit to the last Catholic stronghold in Europe, the final place where Catholicism remains the state religion.
Leo XIV inherited trips that had already been long planned, such as the one to Lebanon, but also a trip to Africa that Pope Francis had even considered for the Jubilee, even though his health no longer permitted it. Regardless of the destination, the successor of Peter, a messenger of peace, is always warmly welcomed by crowds of the faithful. Pope Leo has great charisma, captivating hearts wherever he travels.
He's always ready to listen. He listens a lot. He listens a lot, and it is very important because when people who suffer are listened to, there is a kind of, how can I say, solace, which is brought up because you have been listened.
Who's most compassionate, the most merciful.